I'm sitting here at my desk, and I want to start with a single question that nobody in any press conference, any cable news segment, or any official statement has answered directly. While the United States military was bombing Karg Island last night, while Iranian drones were hitting the UAE this morning, while oil crossed $100 a barrel and the Strait of Hormuz sat closed for the 15th consecutive day. What was America's Treasury Secretary doing? He was on a plane to Paris. Scott Bessent, the United States Secretary of the Treasury, flew to France this weekend to sit down with Chinese Vice Premier Lifeng at the Paris headquarters of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. 2 days of talks, 16 days before Donald Trump is scheduled to land in Beijing for a state visit with Xi Jinping. And here is the thing that the 2-minute television segment will not tell you. These two events, the bombing of Karg Island and the opening of the Paris talks, are not separate stories running on parallel tracks. They are the same story. They are the front and back of the same strategic card. And the connection between them is the most important piece of geopolitical information in the world right now. The United States is fighting a war with Iran. China is Iran's largest trading partner, Iran's largest oil customer, and the country that gets 45% of its oil through the strait the war has closed. And the United States Treasury Secretary flew to Paris this weekend to negotiate a trade deal with that country while the bombs were still falling. That is not normal diplomacy. That is a high-wire act over an active battlefield. And what happens in Paris this weekend and then in Beijing on March 31st will determine whether this war ends in weeks or months, whether oil returns to $70 or climbs toward $200, and whether the global economy absorbs this shock or breaks under it. Stay with me, because the angle that is being missed in every headline is the leverage angle. Who has it? Who needs it? And what is being quietly traded for it in a conference room in France? Let me give you the background you need, because this story does not start in Paris. It starts in a South Korean city 5 months ago, October 30th, 2025, the city of Busan, South Korea. On the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping sat down together at Gimhae Air Base. What emerged from that meeting was a trade truce that pulled the world's two largest economies back from the edge of a collapse that was already showing up in supply chains, manufacturing numbers, and investment portfolios globally. The terms were specific. The United States reduced its emergency tariff rate on Chinese goods. China paused for 1 year its export controls on rare earth minerals and magnets, the materials that American aerospace companies, semiconductor manufacturers, and defense contractors depend on to build jet engines, precision guidance systems, and computer chips. China committed to buying 12 million metric tons of American soybeans in 2025 and 25 million tons in 2026. Both sides paused the expansion of the American blacklist, blocking Chinese companies from buying U.S. high-technology goods. That truce was the foundation. Paris is the next floor of the building, and Beijing on March 31st is the roof. But here is what changed between Busan and Paris. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled Trump's emergency tariffs unconstitutional. The legal architecture that supported the administration's most aggressive trade leverage against China was struck down by America's own judiciary. Washington responded by imposing a 10% global tariff under separate authority. But the reduction in leverage was real, and Beijing noticed it immediately. Then the administration launched a new Section 301 investigation into unfair trade practices targeting China and 15 other major trading partners. China's Commerce Ministry condemned the investigation on Friday and said it reserved the right to take countermeasures. And then, on top of all of it, the United States launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th and closed the Strait of Hormuz. That is the full weight of what Bessent is carrying into the room in Paris. Here is what is on the table: 4 items, and each one matters differently. The first item is tariffs. The United States wants China to hold to the Busan truce terms and not retaliate against the new Section 301 investigation. China wants the 10% global tariff reduced or eliminated. Neither side will get everything it wants. The goal is to produce enough progress that both Trump and Xi can point to deliverables when they stand in Beijing on March 31st and tell their domestic audiences the summit was a success. The second item is rare earth minerals. This is the one that should be getting wall-to-wall coverage and is not. China produces approximately 90% of the world's rare earth minerals and controls an even higher percentage of rare earth processing capacity. These materials go into jet engine coatings, semiconductor manufacturing, electric vehicle motors, and the guidance systems of precision munitions. While some American industries are receiving rare earth exports from China, U.S. aerospace and semiconductor companies are not. They are facing worsening shortages of key materials, specifically yttrium, used in heat-resistant coatings for jet engines. Now hold that fact up against what is happening in the Persian Gulf right now. The United States is conducting its most intensive bombing campaign since the Iraq War. Weapons stockpiles that military advisors warned before February 28th were already depleted are being drawn down further every single day. The industrial capacity to replenish those stockpiles requires rare earth inputs that China is currently withholding from American aerospace manufacturers. The administration was warned about this constraint before the war started. The warnings were dismissed, and now Bessent is sitting in Paris while the bombs are falling, asking China to please release the materials that keep the American military-industrial complex functioning. That is the actual negotiating situation. And it explains why a senior economist at Natixis described the Paris meeting as likely the most important bilateral one before the Xi-Trump summit, not because of soybeans, because of what America needs and who has it. The third item is agriculture. China has been meeting its soybean purchase commitments under the Busan deal. American officials, including Bessent, confirmed this. The administration wants more. It wants China to increase purchases of American agricultural products broadly, and specifically wants China to start buying Boeing aircraft again. China has shown openness, according to sources familiar with Sunday's discussions. The Chinese side indicated willingness to consider additional agricultural purchases, and the two sides found some ways to loosen up the more challenging areas in critical minerals. The fourth item is structure. The two sides are discussing the establishment of new formal mechanisms called the Board of Trade and the Board of Investment. The Board of Trade would be aimed at finding products and sectors where the two countries could grow trade in a balanced way without compromising national security. The Board of Investment would address specific investment issues that arise between the countries. Technical talks on both mechanisms were scheduled for Monday. This is the most significant structural development in U.S. China trade relations in years, not a tariff adjustment, an institutional architecture for managing the relationship permanently. Now, here's the piece that connects everything, the piece that is not on the official agenda and will not appear in any press release. Iran is in the room, not literally, but the Iran war is the invisible presence at every moment of these Paris talks. China gets 45% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. The strait has been closed for 15 days. The island that handles 90% of Iran's crude exports was bombed by American aircraft last night. And Trump publicly posted Saturday morning asking China to send warships to help protect shipping in the strait. China has not responded to that request publicly. That silence is itself a strategic communication. A senior Natixis economist put it plainly before Sunday's talks began. Iran is a new factor, but Beijing is more concerned about the flip-flopping of U.S. policies. That sentence is carrying enormous weight. What it means is that China is not primarily worried about this specific war. China is worried about the fundamental unpredictability of American decision-making. A country that launched a war 2 days before a reported peace deal was within reach, that dismissed its own military advisors' documented warnings, that shifts its stated war objectives 4 or 5 times in 15 days, is not a reliable long-term trade partner. And Beijing is deciding in real time how deeply to integrate with a partner it cannot predict. That calculation is sitting underneath every item on the Paris agenda. Tariffs, rare earths, agriculture, institutional structure. All of it is being evaluated through the lens of the question China's leadership is actually asking. Is the United States a stable enough partner to build a long-term economic relationship with, or is this a country that will launch a war, destabilize the global economy, and then ask Beijing to help clean up the mess? The answer Beijing gives to that question determines whether the Beijing summit on March 31st produces a genuine breakthrough or a managed photo opportunity. Sources familiar with Sunday's talks describe them as remarkably stable, candid, and constructive. Potential areas of agreement were identified in agriculture, critical minerals, and managed trade. The proposals will be presented to Trump and Xi in Beijing for the leaders to make the final decisions. That is the minimum. That is both sides doing enough to justify the summit without doing enough to resolve the underlying tensions. Scott Kennedy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies put it in the most honest framing available. Both sides have a minimum goal of having a meeting which keeps things together and avoids a rupture and re-escalation of tensions, keeping things together. That is the bar, not breakthrough, not resolution. Not the kind of comprehensive deal that stabilizes the global economy, reopens the energy corridors, ends the rare earth shortage, and gives American manufacturers the supply chain certainty they need to function. Keeping things together. And here's what keeping things together means in practice while this war continues. Oil stays above $100. The rare earth shortage continues for American aerospace and semiconductor companies. The Strait of Hormuz stays disrupted. The agricultural and fertilizer price shock that is already locked in for the second half of 2026 keeps building, and the global economy absorbs all of it, while the two countries that could between them resolve the underlying crisis are in Paris talking about soybeans. Trump will land in Beijing on March 31st. He will stand next to Xi Jinping. He will announce deliverables. He will call it a historic meeting. He has already, on social media, declared Iran totally defeated and wanting a deal. He has a clear narrative ready. The question that will determine whether that narrative is built on substance or spectacle is whether the next 16 days produce a genuine back-channel agreement that uses the U.S. China relationship as leverage to open the strait, end the rare earth shortage, and stabilize energy markets, or whether Paris was just keeping things together long enough to take the photograph in Beijing. The next 16 days will give you the answer. Subscribe to Zivaron and hit the bell right now. This story moves by the hour. Drop a comment below. Do you think Trump comes out of Beijing with a real deal or a photo opportunity? Do you think China uses its leverage on Iran? I read every single one.